So we're going to learn. So yeah, we are on for tomorrow. Next week, Thursday's Thanksgiving. We won't meet, but that's a CBST thing. Okay. Saul, good to see you. Let's start off with this Mishnah. It's an interesting teaching. It's from Rabbi Meir, who of course is one of the most famous students of Rabbi Akiva. I'm sure we've mentioned a little bit about Rabbi Meir before. He was there's a lot about Rabbi Meir. He's married to Ilsa. That's not true. He's married to Bruria. Bruria is a very famous woman in the Talmud. Has a lot of things attributed to her. Has a very sad kind of demise at the end. She takes her own life, in part due to like the patriarchy and men being stupid. But Rabbi Meir was so sharp in trying to kind of make his students think more deeply that even though he was one of the greatest rabbis in the times of the Mishnah, as a rule, the halacha doesn't follow him. We don't go like Rabbi Meir, because the truth is we just didn't know what Rabbi Meir held. He would tell his students one thing, and then the next day would say something else, and expect that they would be able to refute him in both directions. So he was always trying to provide resistance so that his students would be able to think more independently. But as a result, we don't actually know what he held. But we have other kind of teachings that we assume that the Mishnayos, for the most part, go like Rabbi Meir. So let's take a look at what it says here today in Rabbi Meir. So having a mayit be'asek. So asek is toiling. It can mean a lot of different things. Asek can also mean business. It can mean also kind of interpersonal relationships of an intimate nature. So the idea is that the person should minimize it, right? And of course that's subjective, because let's say if you start at 100 and you go down to 99, right? So then you fulfilled this. So too, if you started at 9 going down to 8, right? So it's not an objective kind of threshold of this is where everybody should be in terms of proportions, but rather wherever you are, it's good to kind of focus towards minimizing this. V'yasuk b'Torah, and engage in Torah. What's implied is that if you have 24 hours in the day, if you minimize this number, so then you can increase this number. That's what's implied, but it's not explicit. V'havei shafel ruach mifnei kol adam, and a person should be humble in front of each person. That piece here requires probably the most explanation. I can try to make this bigger. That part probably requires the most explanation, in that the rest, I'm trying to not make it too big or too small, because the rest of the Mishnah flows very well. And then this piece, V'havei shafel ruach mifnei kol adam, kind of inserts itself awkwardly. So we need to explain that. Person should be humble in front of every person. But talta min ha-Torah, if a person nullifies their time from learning Torah, so yesh l'cha b'telim harbe kenegdach, right? There will be a lot of nullifications in opposition to them. That means, like, if you can't even carve out time for learning each day, then you're not going to be able to carve out time for other important, healthy things. Oh, it's so interesting that the things that come in terms of messages come in behind the pictures of everybody. Maybe it's good. It's good that stuff is concealed. Okay. So v'havei shafel ruach mifnei, fine. V'im batzla min ha-Torah yesh l'cha b'telim harbe kenegdach. V'im amalta b'Torah. So again, this is going back. It's a different word. Osek means to toil. Amal means to toil. They're synonyms, but osek means to be like more involved in, to be busy with. Amelis is a function of effort. So asek here, it sounds like it's more of a quantity issue of time. How much time of your day, and here it's a function of the quality. How deep are you digging, right? Sometimes a person go to the office, and you're there all day for 8 hours, but like, what did you accomplish? And sometimes a person can be there for a half an hour and accomplish a lot. So the word amal really is a function of effort, to toil, where the asek is like, I'm busy with it. Like, we can be busy with unproductive things as well. It's not negative. I mean, it's the same word here, but the idea is that we're busy with it. So v'im amalta b'Torah, if a person is toiling and engaging and delving with Torah, a person will get a lot of reward. So one kind of interesting shift is that it sounds like a person is involved in work, you also get paid. A person goes to work, they have a job, hopefully they're getting paid, or else it's not a job, you're volunteering. So here it sounds like the reward, and this is what the commentators point out, that the reward that you get for the toil is not commensurate with the work. It's actually exponentially greater. That the reward here is that you're schar harbe. It's not that it pays a lot per hour, right? Or that you work a lot of hours and you get a bigger paycheck. But what it means is that when a person puts in the effort for the same, 60 minutes of the hour, the pay scale shifts depending on the effort that a person puts in. So the more that a person is struggling, the harder it is, the more effort it is, right? The greater the reward. And part of what I think the Mishnah here is coming to combat is that a person can say, listen, I can spend 20 minutes a day learning, but it's not easy for me. It's hard. It doesn't come naturally. So better that I should spend my time engaged in other things. So I think one of the things that the Mishnah is saying here is that when it comes to struggling and learning, that it's actually effort-based. It doesn't make a difference if it takes you 20 minutes, to understand something that's for somebody else it's 20 seconds. It doesn't make a difference. The reward is it's exorbitant. It's exponential. It's effort-based. There is a famous story. Let's stop sharing here for a second. Is anyone familiar with the term nittel or nittelnacht? Yeah, maybe it's a little bit familiar. So for those who speak Yiddish or have some sort of Hasidic background, there's a custom not to learn on the night of the 25th of December. And so that is known as nittel. And then the night is just nach, so nittel nacht. And so you can see actually these old pictures of great rabbis playing chess. And it was a night of doing something else. And the Chassidim in particular, I learned in very Litvish yeshivas, everybody learned on Christmas. It was a day like no other day. I mean, there's no difference. But in the Hasidic world, it's a big deal, and they would do other things. The idea is, like we've spoken many times, time has a texture. There's certain traditions that have Christianity, and certainly at certain times when Christianity was a very physical threat, not just a spiritual threat, but a physical threat to Jews. The attitude of Jews towards Christians, the way it was just reciprocated, and that a lot of that has evolved, and that's good. And now it's not the Judaism of today is not the same Judaism. The Christianity is not the same Christianity. All the things, but. So somebody came to the Satmar Rebbe. Satmar Rebbe was Rabbi Yoel Teitelbaum. He dies in 1979, August, July, 1979. He wrote, I don't know if you can see, he wrote all of these for him. Anyways, he big Talmud Chacham, came from Europe, and in the diaspora since the destruction of the temple times, Hillel actually established a calendar, and in the diaspora. We keep 2 days of Yom Tov because we don't actually know when Rosh Chodesh is the way that they used to. So that idea of having 2 days for a festival, and the entire world does it for Rosh Hashanah, because Rosh Hashanah is the first of the month. So there's 2 days there because in earlier times, in Israel at least, they would figure out when the first of the month was, and then the holidays of Passover and Sukkot are on the 15th of the month. So in 2 weeks' time, everybody knew. But Rosh Hashanah, there wasn't time. So that's known as Sveika de Yoma. Sveika de Yoma is there's a suffix, there's a doubt on the day. We don't know what day on the calendar is the right day. So someone comes to the Satmar Rebbe and says, listen, it's the day before Nittel, because of Sveika de Yoma, because we don't really know when the 25th of December is, maybe we should keep 2 days of not learning, right? And so the Satmar Rebbe, who's super sharp and super quick, responded and quoted a verse, Im ta'azavu, right? If you abandon the Torah for a day, the Torah abandons you for 2. So he says, by just not learning on 1 day, you've already covered the Sveika de Yom of not learning for 2 days. Because we are very much in relationship with God, we're very much in relationship with the Torah. And for anybody, I don't know who this was. It might have been Yitzchak Perlman. It might have been a completely different violinist. Might not have even been a violin, but I think it was. He says, after not playing my violin for 1 day, I know if I don't play my violin for 2 days, it knows. And if I don't play my violin, practicing for 3 days, the audience knows, right? Something like that. That when you're at a competitive level, right, in whatever Olympic sport, if a person is a top tier competitive, whatever it is, athlete, musician, painter, right, it's so competitive that, if you're not engaged in refining it, right, it's very easy to lose that level of expertise. And so there's nothing that we should be more evolved and more kind of sensitive to in present tense than a relationship with God and the Torah that contains the details of that relationship. That even if a person spaces out for a couple of minutes and then has to kind of recenter in relationship with God, like there's that ebbing and flowing, which is natural and part of the human experience. So I think just to bring it back to what Rabbi Meir is saying, and I think this comes to answer why this phrase is here in the middle, that part of being alive in this world, part of the curse of the original sin is we have to toil the earth. We have to, we live by the sweat of our brow. It's part of a physical existence, is that we're engaged in the physical world. And then there's nothing wrong in that. I mean, we can think about work as a curse, but it's probably not that helpful, right? We still have to pay bills however we see it. But I think what the teaching here is that, okay, it's a necessary part of the universe to be engaged in it. If you don't go to the grocery store, how do you get food, right? All kind of the basic things. But recognize that that's secondary and not why you're here. We are not here to just eat, drink, and be merry, but rather to engage in the spiritual. And V'havei shofel ruach mifnei kol adam, I think, is actually a wonderful bridge. That when we think about going out into the world, if a person identifies as, hey, I'm a learner, I'm a spiritual creature, I'm a spiritual being, I'm a child of God, a person can suffer in interpersonal relationships by looking down on other people, right? If a person really says, listen, I have to go to these staff meetings because if not, I can't have a job, so I have to do it, but I'm going to be miserable for it, and I'm really better because I should be sitting and learning. So like that's actually not helpful for anybody. That a person needs to feel humble in front of every person. That each person has a job in this world, and for some of us that has more of a focus on the spiritual learning. For some of us that has more of the working. It's a partnership. You can't have one without the other. That's right. We say ein kemach and ein Torah. If there's no kemach, there's no money, there's no flour, there's no bread, there's no Torah, and if there's no Torah, there's no kemach. It's a relationship. And so part of, I think, the way in which a person can go out into the world and still feel spiritually connected is obviously in the way in which we interact with other people. When we are humble of spirit in front of people, we recognize that God is the source of all creations, including people. And when we are able to then kind of be in control of our time and schedule and manage it properly, we're actually able to get much more into the day. And the converse of that is if a person nullifies Torah, which is supposed to be the sweetest part of the day, Torah is meant to be sweet. So if a person is saying, listen, I don't have time for that, which is pleasureful, so then they're also going to end up, nullifying things which are equally important, because they're not going to be able to develop the ability to kind of prioritize and do which is important. So, okay, I want to stop sharing and hear if people have thoughts or questions on the Mishnah. Also, if anyone wants to play chess on Nitzelnacht, we could probably set up some sort of something.
Okay. I don't understand the very first phrase. What does he mean to do little in business? I mean,
yeah.
How can you live?
So today it costs money to wake up, right? We need life insurance and health insurance and car insurance, and you have to pay for rent or mortgage, and there's maintenance fees. There's just to breathe costs a lot of money. Way back in the day when the Mishnah was written, people had often inherited land. They would build a house. The custom was that people would build where they were going to live during the time between engagement and getting married. And then people generally worked as much as they needed to work to be able to pay the bills for the day, right? They didn't have refrigerators. They didn't have, there wasn't a way, you couldn't buy in bulk, right? The way in which we do it today. People would, whether they were a wood chopper, right? Some jobs took a lot more work before you could get paid. But people basically, they also didn't have banks in the same way. Like people didn't hoard cash because what did you do with it, right? There were certain people who were more wealthy. There were people who traveled. They did bigger deals, right? They had more silver. They had more gold. But for the average people that weren't kind of like the elite, For most people, they worked in a profession that allowed them to live, but part of living was not working. And even if you think about how recent the 40-hour work week is, right? It got a lot worse before it got to a 40, right? The idea of not having to work on the weekends and there was like limited numbers of hours that people could work now legally because it's not healthy. But there's also a different kind of structure in terms of getting money. People used to barter a lot more, and when people were engaged in businesses that were a function of living. A person had chickens, they made eggs. People had cattle, they milked it, right? It was everybody had basic needs that were provided by the kind of the communal. And you had people that worked for each other. It's not so dissimilar, but I think there was less space. For the average person the average middle class was a much bigger class with less space between. So certainly the Talmud has this perspective that if you can get by, meaning live comfortably, working 5 hours a day, why in the world would you work 6 hours a day? It's a different worldview that working 6 hours a day when you can work 5 it's a waste of an hour. So I think that's what that means. It's not so relevant for us.
I don't know that it was relevant for very many people, when this was written. I mean, these people were living hand to mouth.
Yeah. Yes. And look, being a farmer and, is itself not something that you can generally do for 2 hours a day. It's seasonal. And one of the things that the rabbis do point out is so much of life, if you just think about before there was electricity, when the sun went down, it wasn't simple to function, certainly outdoors. And so in the winter months in particular, people really did come inside and they studied much more. In the summer months, people worked much more. The Talmud sees the workday as generally sunrise to sunset, which is very much seasonal, certainly in Israel, right? It's a place where the summer months and the winter months are very, very different months. And so it's not coincidental that Hanukkah, for example, which kind of celebrates the oral law, is during the winter months where there was the most time for learning. But even the idea of having a candle Friday night, lighting Shabbos candles has all sorts of spiritual significance. But also one of the main reasons is that you shouldn't have to eat in the dark, because I think during the week, many people did eat in the dark. If you had resources, you could have candles. But there was something special to make sure that people could see Friday night. So I think in that way, when we think about how much time do I have in a day, what's actually reasonable in terms of working, what am I going to do with the other time? Trying to fill the time with spiritual pursuits, I think is always relevant, even if it's not at the expense of feeding and providing. But in the downtime, what does a person do? The other thing is what it meant to be well off or living comfortably is a level of poverty that we couldn't even imagine for most people, right? In other words, people were happy with much less then. People had a dry place to sleep. People had food for the last meal. It's very different than the way in which we're accustomed. We have air conditioners. It's just the whole existence is a pampered existence. The world's broken and we all suffer. But the idea, how often today do people bathe? Even if a person, let's say, is really even, really struggling to even find the place, even a person who's experiencing homelessness in this country generally has access. I once wrote an article a long time ago about something that's really unrelated. But in Texas, right, where they're known for having some of the worst conditions in jails, there still people shower once a day. In times, right, baths were not simple, especially if a person didn't live in a. So it's a different kind of quality of life. And so I think the baseline of what it looked like to get by, somebody made this observation that, if you think about how long it takes, it would have taken for our ancestors to do anything, right? To make bread, right? You have to harvest it, you have to pound it, you have to, it's really, right? We go to the store, you can buy bread. You would think that we have all this extra time on our hands to be able to be so much more productive. But it doesn't seem to work that way. And I think that's I think probably the holy part of this Mishnah, meaning the eternal truth of this is that it doesn't make a difference how long it takes you to do whatever it is to do, right, there will always be a struggle of, right, trying to make time for the things which are important. And somebody wants to find, a Rebbe of mine wants to find, being wise is the ability to choose between the things which are important and the things which are more important, right? There's no shortage of important things to do in the world. But to really understand which one. So I think that that's what the mission is saying, that, you know, we all only have 24 hours in the day, and we do need to sleep. So, you know, how do we prioritize those competing interests?
I have a question and a statement.
Yeah, sure.
One is, to me, it seems more like make the Torah your focus. Okay, so which lead me to a question where even when you work, there is some, you can have some Torah in it.
Absolutely.
So that, so if you make the Torah your focus, you sort of,
I think you froze. Yeah, 100%.
in some ways, that's, yeah.
Read the last sentence again, because I think you cut out for the last sentence.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I was saying, that especially since, you know, he's using the same word both for esek and lasok.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that's part of the bridge.
So
Yeah, and I think that that's part of the bridge of, you know, be humble in front of people, that when we interact with people, that's actually kind of the sandbox to be able to kind of practice all of the teachings that we've had through the learning. I think we spoke about this once, that the Talmud says that the Gemara, the temple was destroyed because people were not making the blessing on Torah, on learning. And one interpretation is that we make the blessing in the morning, and then we don't repeat it, because the whole day, whether we're working, whether we're learning, we should be thinking about, what does God want from me in the moment? Like, how am I supposed to be honest in business? How am I supposed to treat people, you know, in a respectful way? And so the whole day is meant to have the continuity of learning. There's the applied learning, and then there's the, you know, the theoretical learning. So yeah, Torah-centric values can be applied depending on a person. Some people cannot sit. I mean, I was in yeshiva with people who should not have been in yeshiva, right? If you know, a person sits down to sit and learn with you, oh, I haven't smoked my cigarette yet. Oh, I need to go get coffee. Actually, I'm so tired. You know what? Let me just call my wife. Actually, I need to check the news. Or like, they don't want to be sitting and learning. So like, it's not in anyone's best interest, you know, for people. But everybody can learn something, right? Like Rabbi Chaim says, nobody can do everything. Everybody can do something. You know, not everybody can learn all the time, but everybody can learn, you know, sometimes. And if we don't learn, then we don't learn from all the things. So any other thoughts on this before we close out the Mishnah for today? There are themes here that keep repeating, right? We've seen a lot about humility. We've seen a lot about carving out time. And I think this is something that the rabbis of this time period in particular were really sensitive to, that when we don't have a temple, right? In the times of Rabbi Akiva is already the time where the temple's, the second temple is destroyed. And there's, I think, a real fear about, you know, how are people going to be able to operate in the world without God's presence, you know, having an address the way it used to. And so the rabbinic move very early on is, you know, prayer and learning and acts of kindness. Those are the three pillars, and that we need all three to create the foundation of the tripod for stability. And with the recognition, you know, at this point, even though this Mishnah is being written down, when Rabbi Meir is teaching it, there is no written oral law. There are no Mishnayos that's written. So when we think about the learning that happened in Rabbi Meir's time, it was all oral. It was all rabbi to student. There weren't things being written yet. The way it worked, you know, is the rabbi would open up a Torah scroll, and they would go to a verse, and then they would, you know, kind of download the Torah they had on that verse. But that's how the oral law worked. And so even in times of Rabbi Meir, you know, the idea that a person should sit and learn, there were no books. Forget about a printing press, right? Even handwritten books weren't, you know, things that most people had. And already at that time, there was kind of a prohibition. There was a rabbinic prohibition to write down. The Talmud understands it actually as a biblical prohibition. There's a verse, the Gemara, I believe in Gittin quotes, not to take the oral law and write it down. So the expectation that a person could sit and learn by themselves really, it's a big ask. Come sit down and think about God and review the things that you remember learning, or find the study partner, or a Rabbi, go to a class, those types of things. But it wasn't as easy as it is today. So please, Doug.
I just have to repeat myself. I have no problem with the rest of this whole Mishnah. Just that first phrase, I just find that presumptuous for somebody to just blurt out, "Don't spend time in business."
Sure.
You don't need that there. That's not his point.
Yeah. So what I think he's saying is, again, it's subjective in terms of minimizing it. There's another theological piece here that a person thinks that the amount of time they work is actually the amount of money that they're going to get. And I think part of the theology that he has is that on Rosh Hashanah, it's decreed for the year how much money you're going to make or not make. So we go through the motions because, we have faith, but God wants us to put in the effort. And so we don't rely on miracles. We don't, want to rely on other people. So we have to go to work and do the thing. But there's also a part of us that's supposed to remind ourselves that actually, whether we work a lot or we work a little, we're going to make the amount of money we're going to make. And so there is I think a natural kind of tendency for a person to think let me just spend one more hour at work. Let me just do one more deal. Let me just do one more thing. And then I'll be wealthy. And then I'll be able to have enough. And I think what the Mishnah is saying is that if you really believe, in that theology, you don't make more by putting in more effort in physical ways. And that's the contrast to the spiritual. One last story on this, and this is just, again, I'm not trying to be persuasive that you should adopt this theology, but just to give an example of it. When Lakewood was a much smaller town in New Jersey, there was one butcher. And even though Lakewood's built on chicken farms, they would have to go and pick up kosher meat somewhere, big slabs that would come in. So a second butcher opens up shop. And instead of the first person being really annoyed that now you're going to take away half the business, he says to the person, listen, I have to go into town anyways to pick up meat. I'm happy to pick up your order as well. There's no reason that you should also have to exert. You just started a new business. There's no reason you should have to spend the time schlepping, because the person really believed God will determine how much money I get from one Rosh Hashanah to the next. Not being nice to this person is not going to make me more money. Just the opposite. The more that I really show God that I believe that it's God and not my effort, right? So the more money I'll get. Again, not trying to tell people not to work, but in terms of that theological space, Rabbi Meir is saying, listen, do the work that you need to do, but minimize it in relationship to the way in which you prioritize your spiritual well-being and spiritual growth. Not meant to be persuasive, but just a perspective. All right, friends, it's 3:00. Looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow. Stay well. Take care of yourselves.